Hello everybody and welcome back. I'm Prime Spider-Man 76 and today we're going to be making the ultimate movie review for Superman 2025. What happens when you reboot one of the most iconic superheroes of all time? Do you play it safe or do you completely reinvent the character? After years of waiting, DC Studios has finally answered that question with Superman 2025. Directed and written by James Gunn. This wasn't just another superhero movie. It wasn't even just another Superman movie. This film had an enormous responsibility of launching an entirely new DC universe, introducing a new Superman, and convincing audiences that DC had finally found the right direction after years of mixed reactions to its previous films. So, did it succeed? Well, after watching the movie, I have got a lot to say.
Spider-Man.
Today, I'm going to break down everything from the story, acting, visual effects, soundtrack, humour, emotional moments, and action scenes to how it compares with previous Superman movies. I'll also talk about why David Corenswet impressed me so much, whether James Gunn was the right person to direct the film, and answer the big question: is this the best Superman movie in the decades? So, grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's talk Superman. Now, before I start, I just want to say that this review is completely based on my own opinion. Movies are subjective, so if you love certain parts that I didn't, or I didn't enjoy things that I loved, or you didn't enjoy things that I loved, that's completely fine. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments, because that's one of the best parts about talking about movies, opinions. Also, I'll keep this review mostly spoiler-free at first. Later on, I'll clearly warn you when we are going to be discussing bigger story moments. With that said, let's begin. First, to understand why Superman 2025 matters so much, you have to look at where DC has been over the last several years. The previous DC Extended Universe has some great moments, but it also struggles with consistency. Some movies were loved, some divided audiences, and others simply didn't perform the way Warner Brothers hoped. Eventually, DC decided to start fresh. That's where James Gunn comes in. James Gunn isn't the director of Superman. He isn't just that, but he's also one of the co-CEOs of DC Studios, alongside producer Peter Safran. That means he isn't simply making one movie, he's helping shape the future of the entire franchise. So, right from the start, expectations were incredibly high. If Superman failed, people might lose confidence in the new DC universe before it even really began. That's a huge amount of pressure. Luckily, James Gunn had a strong track record. He directed all 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies for Marvel, and those films became some of the most beloved superhero movies ever made because they balanced action, humour, emotion, and memorable characters. He also directed The Suicide Squad, which many fans consider one of DC's strongest modern films. Because of that history, many people, including me, were excited to see what he'll do with Superman. Honestly, within the first 10 minutes, I realised this wasn't trying to copy Zack Snyder's Superman. It also wasn't trying to remake Christopher Reeve's movie scene for scene. Instead, James Gunn clearly wanted to capture something that made Superman special in the comics. Hope, optimism, kindness, compassion. Those qualities have always defined Superman, and I think this movie understands that better than many superhero films released over the past decade. Kindness matters. Nowadays, superhero movies often focus on darker stories, morally grey heroes, and world-ending threats. There's nothing wrong with that, but Superman has always stood for something different. He's the hero people look up to. He's the hero who helps someone cross the street just as willingly as he'll stop a meteor from destroying Earth. That makes him inspiring. This movie remembers that. Let's talk about the biggest challenge this movie faced: casting Superman. Whenever a new actor takes over such an iconic role, comparisons are inevitable. Christopher Reeve became Superman for an entire generation. Brandon Routh honoured Reeves' performance. Henry Cavill introduced a more serious modern interpretation. Now, David Cornsweet had to convince audiences that he deserved to wear the cape. Personally, I think he absolutely earned it. From his very first appearance, he carries himself exactly how Superman should. He feels calm, confident, friendly, powerful without being intimidating. One thing I loved was how natural his performance felt. He never looked like he was trying too hard to seem heroic. Instead, heroism simply came naturally through the way he behaved. Sometimes the smallest scenes told you more about Superman than the biggest action sequences. Watching him stop to comfort frightened civilians, listening carefully when people spoke to him, showing genuine concern instead of rushing off to the next fight. Those moments reminded me why Superman had stayed the most popular for nearly 90 years. It's easy to write a character who's powerful. It's much harder to write someone who's generally good. James Gunn understands that, and David Cornsweet delivers it brilliantly. Something I think deserves much more praise is David's performance as Clark Kent. A lot of people joke that Clark is just Superman wearing glasses, but if you've read the comics, you know that's not really true. Clark intentionally behaves differently. He's quieter, he's more awkward, he avoids attention, he's approachable. Then, the moment Superman appears, everything changes. His posture changes, his confidence changes, even the way he speaks changes. David Cornsweet manages to create two believable identities without making either one feel fake. That's incredibly difficult to pull off. Christopher Reeve famously mastered the balance decades ago, and I generally think David deserves praise for doing the same thing in his own way. He's not copying Christopher Reeve, he's respecting what made Reeve great while creating his own version of the character. That's exactly what a reboot should do. Of course, Superman isn't the only reason this movie works. Rachel Brosnahan absolutely shines as Lois Lane. She's intelligent, fearless, funny, and determined. She never feels like she's only there because Superman needs someone to rescue. Instead, she actively pushed the story forward through her journalism and determination to uncover the truth. The chemistry between Lois and Clark is also one of the movie's biggest strengths. Their conversation feels genuine. Their relationship develops naturally. You can actually believe they're enjoying spending time together, which makes the emotional scenes much stronger. Then we have Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. I'll save most of my thoughts until later because there's a lot to discuss. But I'll say this. He might have become one of my favourite live-action Lex Luthors ever. Not because he's constantly shouting or trying to dominate every scene, even though he does say, 1A, 1A, but because he's intelligent, calculating, patient, and genuinely dangerous. Sometimes the smartest villains are the most terrifying, and Lex definitely proves that there. At this point in the movie, I realised something. I wasn't just enjoying another superhero film. I was enjoying a Superman film that actually understood why generations of fans have loved this character for almost 9 decades. And that feeling stayed with me throughout this entire runtime. So, after talking about the cast and my first impressions, let's get into what I think is one of the biggest strengths in the movie, the story. Now, I'm going to keep this section mostly spoiler-free for a little while longer, because I know some people might be watching this review before seeing the film themselves. Later on, I'll give a clear spoiler-free, like I have already said before talking about specific scenes. One thing I appreciated straight away is that James Gunn doesn't spend half the movie retailing Superman's origin story. Let's be honest, most people already know it. We know that Kal-El was born in Krypton, we know Krypton was destroyed, we know he arrived on Earth in a small spacecraft, we know Jonathan and Martha Kent raised him in Smallville, we know he eventually became Superman. Almost everyone knows those basics, whether you have read the comics or not. Instead of repeating all of that for the 100th time, the movie trusts the audience. It gives you enough information to understand what's happening, but it doesn't waste time explaining things you've probably seen before. I really like that decision because it meant the story could get moving much faster. Rather than asking, how did Superman become Superman, the movie asks a much more interesting question. What does it actually mean to be Superman? And that's where I think the movie really shines. One thing that surprised me was how much this movie focuses on ideas instead of just action. Yes, there are plenty of exciting fight scenes. Yes, there are moments with huge visual effects. But beneath all of that, the film is asking some interesting questions. What makes someone a hero? Can one person inspire millions? How do you stay hopeful in a world where people constantly question your intentions? Those themes have always been a part of Superman's character, but I think this film explores them in a really accessible way. Superman isn't just trying to prove that he's the strongest person on Earth. He's trying to prove that kindness still matters. That might sound simple, but I think that's why the character has lasted for almost 90 years. He's not inspirational because he can fly. He's inspirational because despite having all that power, he chooses compassion over fear. There are several moments throughout the movie where Superman can take the easier option, but instead he crosses the harder path because it's the right thing to do. Those scenes stood out much more than any explosion. Another thing I really enjoyed was the world building. This doesn't feel like a world where Superman is the only interesting person. It generally feels like a universe full of heroes, villains, scientists, journalists, and ordinary people, all living their own lives. That's important because this movie is supposed to launch an entirely new DC universe. Instead of making everything revolve around Superman, the movie quietly suggests that there's a much bigger world out there. You get little hints about other heroes and other events without the film constantly stopping to say, look, here's another character. That restraint really impressed me. Some superhero movies spend so much time setting up sequels that they forget to tell a good story. This movie never felt like a 2-hour advertisement for future films. It feels like its own complete story first. Then, if you're paying attention, you notice little details that hint what's coming next. I think that's exactly how a shared universe should work. Let's talk about the humour, because I know this is something people were worried about. James Gunn is known for comedy. Sometimes his movies are very funny. Some people were concerned that Superman would become too silly. Personally, I don't think that happened. There are definitely funny moments. Some made me laugh out loud, others just made me smile, but the humour rarely undercuts the emotional scenes. That's really important. One of my biggest frustrations with some modern superhero movies is that they build up powerful emotional moments and then immediately interrupt it with a joke. Thankfully, Superman doesn't do that very often. When a serious moment happens, the movie usually lets that moment breathe. That makes the emotional scenes much more effective. The comedy feels like something that naturally happens because of the characters, rather than something that's forced into every scene. Now, let's move on to the action. This is Superman, after all. People expect incredible action sequences, and I don't think the movie disappoints. One thing I really appreciated was how Superman actually feels incredibly powerful. Sometimes superhero movies accidentally make their main hero feel weaker just to create tension. Here, Superman generally feels like one of the strongest beings on Earth. When he flies, you believe it. When he punches, you feel the impacts. When he rescues people, you understand why the world looks up to him. The flying sequences especially deserve praise. Flying has always been one of the hardest superhero abilities to make look believable. In older movies, technology simply wasn't advanced enough. Those films did an amazing job for their time, but modern visual effects allow Superman to move in ways that simply weren't possible decades ago. The speed, the camera movement, the aerial battles, everything feels much more dynamic. There were several moments where I generally forgot what I was watching visual effects because they were so convincing. Speaking of visual effects, I thought they were excellent. Modern audiences expect superhero movies to look spectacular, and I think Superman delivers. The CGI generally blends really well with practical sets. Nothing constantly pulled me out of this experience. Of course, if you pause almost any blockbuster frame by frame, you'll probably find shots that don't look perfect. That's true of almost every big budget movie, but while actually watching the film, I rarely noticed anything distracting. Instead, I found myself becoming constantly immersed in the world. That's exactly what visual effects are supposed to do. One thing I absolutely loved was the colour palette. This may sound like a strange thing to praise, but I think it makes a huge difference. For years, people associated DC movies with darker colours and muted visuals. This movie goes in the opposite direction. The skies feel brighter, Metropolis feels alive, Superman's suit actually stands out. The red cape, the blue suit, the yellow emblem. Everything feels vibrant. And honestly, that's how Superman should look. Superman has always represented hope, so why shouldn't his movie look hopeful too? I think James Gunn made exactly the right choice here. The brighter visuals don't make the movie look childish, they make it optimistic. There's a big difference. Now, let's talk about the soundtrack. I think the movie deserves much more recognition than it's probably going to get. A great superhero theme should make you feel something the moment it starts playing. Think about John Williams' original Superman theme. People still recognise it nearly 50 years later. That's incredibly difficult to achieve. Without spoiling anything, I think the music in Superman does an excellent job of making the emotional scenes feel even more powerful. When I listened to the original theme, I actually got chills. I am not even joking. Which generally gave me goosebumps. It was just crazy. I don't even know what to say. And sometimes music can completely change how a scene feels. Here, it absolutely does. Whether it's an emotional conversation or a huge action sequence, the soundtrack consistently helps elevate what's happening on screen. At this point, I realised something important. I wasn't just enjoying Superman because it had exciting action. I was enjoying it because I actually cared about the characters. The action mattered because I was emotionally invested. And for me, that's the difference between a good superhero movie and a great one. Overall, I came away from Superman 2025 feeling really impressed. It reminded me why Superman has remained one of the greatest superheroes of all time. The movie combines exciting action, emotional moments, great performances, and an uplifting message about hope and kindness in a way that feels fresh while still respecting the character's history. David Cornsweet was an excellent choice for Superman. James Gunn clearly understands what makes the character special, and the supporting cast all played their roles brilliantly. While no movie is completely perfect, I generally had a great time watching it, and it's one of the best superhero films I have seen in recent years. If I had to give it a score, I'd rate Superman 2025 a 9.5 out of 10. I definitely recommend seeing it if you're a Superman fan, a DC fan, or just someone who enjoys a well-made superhero movie. Thanks so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more movie reviews, and let me know in the comments what you thought of Superman. I'd love to hear your opinions, and I'll see you in the next video.
Meanwhile,
Holy crap, I stuttered so much.